Welcome back. Customer experience is one of the pillars of the President's management agenda. I mentioned at the beginning of the program that Federal CIO Clare Martorana says AI will be an important part of the federal government's CX efforts. One of the agencies using AI to improve the experience of the people it serves is the Department of Veterans Affairs. Gil Alterovitz is Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer at the VA. Joe Boye is System Engineer for Palo Alto Networks. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. Gil, it's great to see you again. Saw you a couple of weeks back at your AI Summit. What was the reason you wanted to get people who weren't necessarily AI folks together to talk about what you're doing with AI across the agency?
Yeah, the AI Summit's really been an exciting adventure. We've had a couple of these now. They're beginning to be kind of an annual series to really bring people together because AI is really a multidisciplinary field. You may think about AI experts, but you also need them to work together with domain experts in particular areas where it might be applied. There's customer experience needs. There's different aspects that really create a team. And so to do that, you have to kind of form these teams, and to network in conferences like this is where we discover new use cases, discover different projects going on in different locations, and sometimes actually form new teams as a result, new collaborations. And so it's really been exciting to see the development over the years as we see how we can translate from that research and development to operations, to see the development as we went from just like a dozen or so use cases now to well over 100.
What has driven that explosion, other than the demand signal, obviously, from across the agency, but what's driven that? Is it that people have said, I think I understand what a potential use case would be, here's how we would do it, is there a tool available to help us, or is there some other way that you're seeing that momentum happening?
I think it's a combination of several factors. So one, the technology has really taken a step up. It's kind of been a step function, both in terms of the hardware and especially the type of software and algorithms that are available. People have seen a number of these sort of large language models, generative AI. They enable new types of use cases that weren't possible before, or that before would not have been done in as an efficient way. And so it's just a larger number of use cases, and then also the types of data that has become available, the amount of data, the speed at which you can get access to that data, that's important for building the models. You can think of the models almost like compressed information in some way. And so the more information you have, the better you can learn. And so as we are able to better interconnect that data, we're also better able to build models. And of course, as you said, the demand signal, there's a huge demand for this, and only recently are we able to start to satisfy that demand by having and creating these large models that can be suitable in different types of application areas.
I want to come back to that idea of satisfying the demand signal later in the conversation, Gil, but one of the takeaways from the conversations I had with folks there, I had 4 terrific conversations with VA people that are in the archive of the FedGov Today podcast at fedgovtoday.com. But one of the big themes that I took away from all of those was the concept of trustworthy AI. How do you define trustworthy AI at VA?
Right, that's a great question, and that's actually what we've spent a lot of time over the past probably a couple years, is to define a trustworthy AI framework. And we actually define it in terms of these different principles, whether something be purposeful, whether it satisfies certain fairness and equitable kind of constraints. And so that framework actually, as part of the summit, it was actually announced by the secretary that the VA has adopted this department-wide department-wide trustworthy AI framework that builds on a number of different initiatives that have come out, whether it be in the last few years, whether it be the AI Bill of Rights and different executive orders and so forth. And then it also tailors it to what the VA's needs, the veterans' needs, takes into account a number of frameworks there. So it's been really really useful for us to have that framework. So then now as we can leverage that and develop it and further to see how it can apply to these different use cases. So we can evaluate use cases and see how they fit along on this kind of this area of a trustworthy AI so that we can make sure to move forward and serve the veterans in the best way possible.
Joe, welcome. It's great to see you. You have spoken about, written about a number of times ethics in artificial intelligence. How does what you are doing and what the company is doing comport with what Gil talked about trustworthy AI at VA?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's important for our company as a provider of cybersecurity to ensure that the customers who entrust us with their data and how we use that data is protected, right? And so when we look at trustworthiness as we build our models, we're ensuring that we provide the right parameters and security around the systems that we're using, and making sure that the data that we do have has those secure wrappers around it so that things like privacy, anonymizing our customers' data as we build and tailor these models to various types of malware that we're seeing in our environments can be secured. It's also important to realize that there's an educational piece that has to be put in place. When you talk about trustworthiness, how are we training the people who are building the models? Right, what are the types of policies we're putting in place to ensure that there's eyes watching those, behind the creation of the models, right? And making sure that stands out before we begin to implement these things for our customers, where they have the confidence that whatever we are able to put into our products, they can trust and use to secure their networks.
Is there a kind of a balance that you have to strike between making sure that the product is transparent and making to the customer, and making sure that in a security environment, it's not too transparent to the people who might be trying to breach the defenses of the agency that you're serving?
Yes, and so when consumers of our products, whether it's leveraging our inline machine learning, which helps with ensuring that those zero-day attacks or those unknowns can be discovered, also realize that when they receive our product, that we're aligning to what we say and we preach in terms of whether it's coming from our CEO, or it's coming from our product teams, whether it's coming from our sales team, and ensuring that it aligns also to things like AI Bill of Rights that are coming out, whether it's aligning to memorandums that we see coming from the government, and making sure that stuff makes its way back into our product team, who's responsible for building out those ethical algorithms and models. For us, it's a little different because we're dealing with ones and zeros. And so from an ethical perspective, there's not as much as you would see when you're dealing with, PII or personal health records, right? And ensuring that an outcome based on health is not driven by a bias of someone who's building the model. Right? Our focus in terms of ensuring that we stop those people who are trying to break what the VA is trying to do in terms of providing those healthcare systems to their veterans is where we're really focused on.
Dmitry Kuznetsov of DHS talked about AI as a force multiplier. He didn't use that term, that's my term, but that's essentially, I think, the message he was trying to convey. What do you see in some of the use cases that you're doing at VA, AI providing just more muscle power behind some of the work that people have to do there?
Right. I think that's a good way to think about AI, is something that can augment some things that are already happening and make things more efficient. And in fact, some of the best applications are ones that are kind of help kind of support the overall structures. So you may, for example, look at, there are concerns around provider burnout or healthcare worker burnout. How can you make, for example, using natural language processing, be able to take images of notes and turn them into notes that are structured, that AI can process better and allow people to find those notes that they need more efficiently? So that doesn't that really just augments and makes it faster for them to find their notes rather than actually making decisions for them. There are lots of examples like that. For example, dictation and transcription, transcribing what someone has said to make it more efficient, and having that be linked to their workflow so they can more efficiently access the information rather than having to write down the notes, then later copying it and processing it in a more complicated way. So I think one of the keys is embedding it in the workflow itself. So that way it becomes most useful and more efficient for the end user. And that's what really we found, at least for the, if you count the physician as the customer of this particular use case, or the healthcare provider, is what kind of makes them really use it and have a positive experience with that.
What does the force multiplier effect look like from a security perspective, Joe?
We have a workforce challenge. You've heard it on the news, you've heard it within the government, you've heard it across the board, and we see AI as that workforce multiplier that enables organizations to be better with what they have. And so, for example, you talked about the user experience. Imagine you sitting behind a keyboard, freshly new into the space, and you have a co-pilot that helps guide you through the process of ensuring your environment is secure, setting up the right policies to make sure that what you do set up is going to be effective, and getting those recommendations from the AI to say, hey, this is where we think you should best put your tools and resources to get the best out of it, right? And so that's one way in which we see it being a force multiplier, right, is making up for what you don't have. And then in addition to that, it's giving you the perspective to say, well, if these things are in place, what could that outcome be? And now I can be more targeted, right? When we talk about efficiencies, right? How can I be more efficient, not only with the few dollars I have, but with the few people I have? And so we see that as another mechanism in which we can help. There's two things that come to mind when we at Palo Alto think about AI, and that's the generative AI, right? Which is some of that large language model and knowledge representation. And can I type in a query and can I get a response, right? And then the other one is precision AI, which goes to this idea that we understand how important our role is in defending your network. So we must be precise with the information we're providing you to ensure when you do make that decision, when that colonel or whether that general or whether that undersecretary is determining whether or not they should make a decision, that they can rely on that data because it is precise and we have very little room for error, right? And so we see that as a force multiplier and be able to make the right decisions faster, and then ultimately the goal of reducing your mean time to respond, right, and the mean time to detect.
You used the two words that I'd scribbled down here to ask you about next, and that's making faster decisions. How's AI driving faster decisions?
Yeah, look, the information is vast. We talked about in the last segment, you talked about in the last segment, the amounts of data that's being collected. You think about DHS as an organization and think about their role to be responsible for collecting all that diagnostic data across all the various agencies they support. A person can't do that. A team of 1,000 people can't do that. That's where the AI comes in to help with the decision-making process, look at the environment and be able to use the behavior to say, hey, this is where you all need to start making those decisions and provide those to the analysts and the decision-makers in near real time, right? And so what used to take us at an organization in Palo Alto Networks 30 days to respond to something, now it happens in minutes, right? And so we see that AI bringing in and mixing that with automation as a key driver in terms of the mean time to response and decision-making for organizations.
I want to go back to that idea that we discussed earlier about satisfying the demand signal, Gil. What does the demand signal look like? Now, what are people coming to you and coming to your teams and saying, we'd like to be able to do blank. We have this challenge that we need some help with. Maybe there's an AI solution, maybe there's not. What do those things look like? Are they primarily patient to provider? Are they primarily back office functions? What does that landscape look like at VA?
I think we're hearing different things from different stakeholders. So from physicians, for example, they're interested in some of those things that we're talking about, provider burnout, things like that. But there's also interest from them and from patients for more kind of extravagant types of AI around diagnosis and really things that are very exciting, some of which are ready and some of which need a little more work to be done. I think certainly some of the areas where you can see the biggest impact are potentially those back office or some of those that affect many applications rather than ones that affect just one application. Because again, the more data you have, the more it can work better because it has more data and so forth. So And then from patients, we're seeing things around, they want to make sure that whatever application is developed is transparent or allows them to see and understand why decisions are being made a certain way. So that's kind of across use cases, I would say. But if there's a particular use case, it would be kind of that emphasis. And so that's why we find the trustworthy AI framework kind of helps address all these together, right? Is it fit for purpose? Does it, do you really need AI? Is there the security angle to it? Is there the transparency angle to it? So it's kind of, I know it's called trustworthy AI framework, but it's almost like an AI framework overall to think about.
You used an interesting turn of phrase there, I think, Gil. You talked about AI applications that are ready versus ones where there's more work to be done. How do you know when something's ready, and how iterative can you be when maybe you have something that's ready but can be refined after it's in the field? Is there some level of refinement of iterability there for you?
Yes, indeed there is. So when you look at it, part of it involves the model and part of it involves the data. So let's just take one example. In the data, if that model was learned outside the VA, is it ready necessarily for the VA? The VA has a different demographics, different population, different geographical centers. So you have to kind of test it in these locations or retrain it with that additional data. If you look at the model itself, does the model take into account different variables, look at what are proxies to other variables to make sure that it will allow for equitable decision making and so forth. And so you need to look at both the data, the model, and also how you use it. And so each of those, as you take a step forward, you can kind of iterate, as you mentioned, and go from a pilot phase to a kind of a later phase, and then kind of distribute it through a network, because there are these hundreds of medical centers. So you don't have to start with all of them, right? You start with a few hubs and kind of learn from that and move forward.
Mm-hmm. Joe, what does iteration look like from a security perspective using AI applications? Do you have that same opportunity?
Yeah, I think for us, one of the things we do is we look at these adversarial samples, right? And so in classifying images, right, you need to make sure that the image you classify is right. And we know that the adversary is constantly trying to affect how these models work by including samples that may throw off the model. So if I know that this model is supposed to be Gil with this image, and then they throw in an adversarial sample that now turns Gil into Francis, well, that's the wrong class.
It's bad for Gil, for one thing.
And so we want to make sure we insert that as part of our process to ensure that we can catch these things early on in the development of the solution and running them through the models to ensure that when we say, hey, this is going to work, that the outcome for the customer is expected.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to follow on?
Yeah, actually, I think one thing that's interesting, when we talk about iteration and so forth, we're trying to bake that into the whole process and system, right? By having these different National AI Institute AI centers in different places, you have this paradigm where you can test and try it at several, and then kind of spread from there and go forward. So we just announced at the summit that you mentioned we're going to have 4 new AI centers like this, and we're looking forward to moving on the iterative process as well.
Where's this going? Obviously, exponential growth is something that appears pretty self-evident, but what direction do you see this growth going in, Gil?
The growth in AI in general?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think there's kind of a couple different angles. One is kind of where AI, it's the part of AI that kind of simulates and acts similar to a human in some ways, kind of more traditional AI in some sense. So that's something that we really didn't have before, where you could have something interacting with you that you aren't sure if it is a human or not, right? And so there's going to be and there are a lot of questions about how to do that, but if there's transparency and so forth, that allows for a whole new set of functions. And I think that has, basically that has that exponential growth curve kind of built right in there. And then the other AI is kind of more kind of traditional AI of like looking at data, analyzing a lot of data and finding patterns, and that certainly has growth as we are growing our data sets and so forth. And I think that it's going to be the combination of those two that's really going to be powerful, that increased data set, that human-like capability, and potentially embodiment through like robotics. So that synergy of 3 things, I mean, that's going to be really the future in terms of exponential synergy is what I would say.
Gil, Joe, terrific insights. Thanks both very much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
You can read more about AI at the VA and find the archive to the conversations I described at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the data deluge driving AI demand in financial management. AI In Depth continues in a moment.